Welcome. Thank you for coming to Badgerland, Badgerland at Home, the right time to create. Let's plot. Welcome to our volunteer again speaker, Liz Holden. Thank you again for being here for part 2. So during our time today, I'm doing the welcome right now, logistics. You can either be unmuted, you can unmute yourself, or you can chat. Those will both be available to you during the meeting. We'll go through the Girl Scout Promise and Law, and then I'm gonna pop off and let Liz take over because she knows what she's doing, all about these awesome activities and about grading. And I'll read a little bit about her so you know. So here we go. All right. We'll start with the promise. On my honor, I will try to serve my community and my country, to help people at all times, and to live by the Girl Scout law. And the law, I will do my best to be honest and fair, friendly and helpful, considerate and caring, courageous and strong, and responsible for what I say and do, and to respect myself and others, respect authority, use resources wisely, make the world a better place, and be a sister to every Girl Scout. Awesome. And so again, our speaker today is Liz Holden, who is an author and a physicist and a roller derby player. Liz is currently writing a young adult novel about a junior roller derby team and is sending literary agents her completed middle grade mystery novel set in Amsterdam. She's had short stories published in literary magazines such as Punchels, Everyday Fiction, and Stirring, and has written extensive physics textbook supplements for McGraw-Hill, Pearson, and Macmillan Publishing. She is a physics professor and an avid roller derby player. So thank you, Liz. I'm going to stop sharing now.
Yeah, and thank you so much for having me. And I wanted to point out that 2 of the things in my bio there, it mentioned a young adult novel and a middle grade novel. One of the things we're going to talk about today is how publishers make these classifications of what books are and how that helps them sell books, just so that we writers kind of know what's going on the other side of things, and know how to sort of market and explain our own work. So let me share my screen. And yeah, just do that. And it's always weird, right, when there's a syllabus for the class I'm teaching next year. That's not what I'm showing you. Let's find it. There we go. It's weird watching other people be on a computer you can't see, I know, and you just see me like staring at the screen. All right, so let's begin. So I had this slide in here from last time, but I know that I have met most of you last week, so I'll just say really quickly, I've written short stories for a long time. I've written things before. I wrote a novel when I was in my 20s and submitted that to agents. We'll talk more about submitting things to agents in a little bit. That didn't go anywhere. That happens, you know. In looking back at it, I think there was a lot of good in it, but I wasn't ready to submit it to agents. And so now I finished a middle grade mystery novel, and while I'm submitting it and trying to get it published, I'm working on a new novel. And I think that's really important to not just kind of put all your eggs in one basket. So we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But yeah, in addition to teaching physics, I started as a journalism major in college. I've always written stories. And I switched from journalism to physics because it's a lot. You can always write. You can't really do physics in your spare time or as a hobby, right? That's tougher. So I switched my major. I also wanted to bring up a note on sharing. We're going to do some writing, and we're also going to do some editing today. And so I will encourage you to share the things that you've written. You can read them out loud, or you can share them in the chat, and I can read them. Few different notes about that. One is that since there's 4 of you, we may not have time for everybody to share every time. So I'll just kind of have to keep an eye on the time. And if you don't get to share on a particular occasion, I'll try to make sure you get to the next time so that everybody can share something at least once if they want to. You are not in any way required to share your work. That's just if you want to. It is important to be really supportive, and you know, there's a lot of value in critiques, but we're not doing critiques of each other's work today. We're just offering positive comments if we're saying anything at all. So there's, just encouragement to not say anything critical about someone else's work, because that's not what we're focusing on right now. And then finally, if you are going to share it in the chat, we'll probably have to maybe have someone else share in the meantime or something if you are writing on paper and then transcribing it into the chat, just so that there isn't too much of a lag time. We'll sort of stagger it, and maybe, if you're like, oh, I want to share, but I have to type it first, then we'll have someone else share first or something while you're typing. We'll figure it out. All right, so just like last time, I want to just jump right in with a writing exercise. And so I'm going to put this up on the next slide, and I'm going to explain a little bit more about it than just the words that you see. Also, I apologize if you hear a lot of loud construction noises. There's a lot going on outside my window right now. I'm getting a new air conditioner installed, and I don't even know. It sounds like a whole lot of other things are happening. It's loud. So let me know if it's an issue, and I'll just shout more. All right, so the exercise we're going to do is I want you to write a scene where you are imagining somebody just walked in to some place. They're carrying something and they want something. They have a goal. That is the only guidance that I'm giving you. It doesn't have, did they walk into a house? Do they walk into a restaurant? Do they, the castle, right? We don't know where they walked in. We don't know who they are, anything about them. We just know they're carrying something and they want something. And with that idea in mind, with that sort of framework, I'd like you to take 5 minutes and write a scene. And I really want you to take the full 5 minutes. Just keep pushing yourself, keep writing more, even if you think, that's enough, maybe I'm done. I want you to write a little more. So I will keep an eye on the time. I'll let you know as minutes pass. I'm hitting start now. So you have 5 minutes. You're writing a scene about someone walking in somewhere, carrying something, and they want something. They have a goal. You can interpret that however you would like. That's the beauty of it. Side note to Katrine, timing 5 minutes and announcing when it reaches certain things really makes me think of roller derby. I feel like I want to shout, keep doing your crossovers. Wait. Yeah. One minute in. Two minutes in. 3 minutes in. One minute left. Keep writing. You got about 20 seconds left, so start thinking about wrapping up whatever sentence or paragraph you're on. Cool. All right, so time is up. Would anybody like to share their work? I'm gonna try to bring up the chat. Why I have troubles with this every time. I want the chat here. Oh, I just had to move that bar out of the way. I'm sure this is lots of fun for you guys to watch me do. All right, I've got the chat up. Does anyone want, where did it go? Can I move it around? I want to move it around. There we go. There we go. Would anybody like to share their work? You can say so. Yes, no, both answers are fine. Give you a moment to think about it. Click into this slide that says share real big with a question mark, not required. All right. Awesome. Peyton would like to share. Fantastic. Peyton, do you want to read it aloud or you want to put it in the chat? Fantastic. All right. So go ahead and get that in the chat and then I can read it to everybody. And even if you're not sharing, hang on to this stuff that you wrote. Don't delete it. Don't throw it away. Don't do anything with it right now. We're going to talk about some other stuff for a while, but we're going to come back to it at the end today. So definitely don't discard it. Another thing for you to think about, you don't have to answer this necessarily, but one of the things I've talked about last week, and you may have noticed too, is sometimes when we start writing and then we keep writing, things sort of evolve. And 5 minutes in, we might feel like, oh, actually the opening sentence that I wrote isn't quite what's going on. And so things might have sort of evolved or changed in your head of this scene as you kept writing. Another reminder for those who were here last week, and for you, Linda, or at least whoever is on Linda's iPad, I don't know, Linda's iPad, if you'd like to let us know if your name is Linda or if you have a different name, because we know some people are on their parents' iPad or something like that, then I won't just call you Linda's iPad the whole time. So feel free to say your name or type it into the chat. What was I saying? Oh, yeah. Nope. I lost it. I don't know what I was saying, but something I said last time. Yes, I got it. Crummy first drafts, as Anne Lamott talks about them, right? If you were writing it and you were feeling like, what if this is dumb? Or you're looking at it now and you're going, oh, this was kind of confusing, or I just had to come up with a scene on the spot. Maybe, you know, Liz just made me do this. This is not my best work. Any sort of negative or critical thoughts you're thinking, we don't care. Getting words on paper is important. I had what felt to me like a very profound thought in the past week, where I knew I needed to sit down and work on my novel, but, you know, I'm an adult. I have a lot of other responsibilities. And I was thinking like, maybe I should clean my floor, just, you know, sweep it, you know, just keep up on things in my kitchen. And then I was thinking, all right, even if I write and it's no good, you can edit things that are no good and make them good. You cannot edit a clean floor and turn it into a novel. And then I wrote. And I've actually wrote about 7,500 words since I saw you all last. So I got a lot done in the last week. I think it's really important if you want to write to try to write frequently so you don't get sort of frozen and feeling like it's been a long time since you've done it. Even if you're writing a little bit each day, doing a little each day is better than not doing it often and then sitting it down and doing it in a big chunk. So it can be harder to overcome that then if you're sort of feeling rusty. So building that practice, that habit feeling is important. So we'll just wait for Peyton to post that in the chat. And I think what I'll do then is maybe talk about some things on the next slide while we're waiting. I'm going to see if I can click forward. I did it. And I'll just, Peyton, you can just kind of listen. I'm not saying anything really crucial. I'm just giving you guys a preview of what I'm going to talk about today. I know we said in general we're talking about plot, but specifically we're going to talk about things in terms of editing. So in other words, things that you're doing after the first draft, after you're just writing and things are coming out. Oh, perfect. Let's read it. So let's go back to our prompt. Who walked in? What are they carrying? What do they want? The doors creaked open an inch and the girl slid inside the library, clutching her library card against her heart. She headed directly for the fantasy section and scanned the books. The girl hesitated and then pulled out piles and piles of books. She stumbled towards the checkout line, her face hidden behind treasured stories of faraway places unlike any that the girl had ever known, places to escape to. The girl moved toward the front of the line and lovingly put the books down. The librarian stared at the girl and then gestured towards a nearby sign, which read, "You may check out up to 10 books." The girl's face fell. Oh no. I think that's great. And you really get a sense of her character and who she is in her actions. And, you know, you see what matters to her, and you can see, you know, both what she's doing and then what that means to her. I think that's great. And I love that I'm sure with all four of you have written 4 completely different things with that prompt. You know, even if I had said, write something about a girl going into a library, everybody would have written something very different. Because we're all unique and we all have our own perspectives, and it's great. So thank you so much for sharing that, Peyton. I think it's great. And I want to read more. I want to be like, will she get the other 10 next week? Or, you know, I feel bad for her. All right, so here's our preview. We're going to talk about editing tips. We're going to talk about fiction categories and their stats, and I'll show you what that means more when we get there, and the road to publication. And so this I'm considering under plot in that sometimes we can figure out the plot of what we're going to write in advance. But I think oftentimes as we start writing, things start evolving, things start changing, and it's important to just go with that in your first draft of what you're writing. And then maybe we can come back and think about, what is the structure of my plot? How are the stakes changing? You know, how can I edit this so that it has a plot and is a sort of consistent piece altogether? And then we'll talk about some more details about categorizing your work and potentially selling it. And this is all, of course, since this is for the Novelist Badge, this is all considering fiction. So we're not talking about nonfiction writing at all today. So some small scale tips for editing, sort of on a line by line level. These first few tips are just good advice, period. Take a little bit of time away. Don't go from really intensely writing to immediately editing it. Get a little bit of space. Even if that's just a couple of hours where you go and you think about something else or you watch a movie. It's your brain that needs the break so that it can come back and see things with fresh eyes. if you can print out what you have, it's not required, but it is so much easier to catch typos when you have printed things out and spelling mistakes. And I don't know why our brain needs to see things in a different medium in which we created them, and that helps. If you wrote your story by hand and then maybe you type it up, that's a different medium, and that could be good for editing. Read it out loud. Seriously, this helps so much. It helps you figure out, do your sentences flow? Are they repetitive? Are they hard to understand? You just spot things, you spot errors when you're reading things out loud. And then point of view and verb tense. I bring this up just for some common mistakes, just things to pay attention to. So point of view, right? We could be first person, meaning everything is I saw this, I did this, I, right, first person. And then often, usually things are not written in second person, which would be you did this, you saw this, you thought this. Mostly we don't do that. You could, but it's uncommon. Most common are first person and third person. And third person could be third person limited, where which is what I would say Peyton's piece right there reads to me, at least in that first category, or in that first paragraph, sounds like third person limited, because we know what the girl is thinking. We're kind of up close in what the girl is experiencing, thinking, doing. We're not suddenly going to the librarian's perspective. We're not sort of zoomed out. We're right up close with that girl. So that would be third person, sort of limited to one character. And then there's third person omniscient, where you're kind of zoomed further back explaining the action. It's more like a sense of a separate narrator. So making sure you're staying consistent with your point of view, certainly are you staying consistent with first versus third, and also being consistent with third person limited versus third person omniscient. Don't mix the two together. If you are staying third person limited the whole time, and then suddenly 2/3 through your book you have a paragraph that's written from someone else's perspective, that could be kind of confusing unless it's done on purpose. And verb tense, of course, we could write things in the present tense or the past tense. Either's fine. Just make sure that you do one or the other and not both. And yeah, patterns, repeated words. I have a tendency to start every single sentence I type with I. Not literally, but almost. I write so many sentences that start with I, and I notice that, and I'm like, oh gosh. I also overuse the word little. I don't know why. I'll be like, oh, they were a little scared, or the drink was a little hot. And I just say it over and over, and you start noticing those patterns that crop up during your first draft, and then you can fix them. When you're doing this, you shouldn't feel like a sort of harsh judge of your own work, more sort of paying attention to how you're feeling as you're reading it. Like, have a sort of good-hearted curiosity about the work. Like, oh, what am I enjoying? How can I make this better? As opposed to like, ugh, this stinks, I need to change everything, or anything like that, right? A sort of curious approach to what's working, what's not, what sort of changes might I want to make. Leaps in logic, also, you're writing it, so you know what it's supposed to sound like, but of course, you want other people to read it and understand it, so there might be things that you think are obvious that are not obvious. So paying attention to that. And then I also wanted to share about getting others to look at it, but choose wisely. One thing is to tell people what sort of feedback you want. If you just want to say, hey, I wrote this short story, what do you think? That can be a little bit scary unless you know that person really well and know the sort of feedback they're going to give, and that that's what you want. So if you just want someone to read it and tell you, hey, here's what I think is working, here's what I think is good, tell them that up front. If you want someone to go through line by line and check your spelling and your grammar and typos, that's a different sort of feedback. If you want someone to go through and say, here's what made sense, here's what interested me, here's what I didn't like, here's what was boring, that's a different sort of feedback. But make sure you're clear with people up front what sort of feedback you want back, because if you want to just hear, hey, overall, what's working, what's not, and someone comes back and is like, well, you split an infinitive here, and this is a run-on sentence, and they just go sentence by sentence and check your grammar, that can be kind of discouraging. So be very discerning. Also, if there's somebody in your life that can be a little negative or not make you feel good about your work, don't show them your work. You don't have to. Whoever that is, No, don't. Um, there are plenty of people out there, and we'll talk about that a little bit later as far as sharing work, who can read it and give you good, thoughtful criticism that isn't hurtful and isn't, mean-spirited. I also want to talk about some more large-scale questions, and this is where I want to bring up tension. So one of the questions in the writing prompt you just did was one of the things is, what do they want? In every scene, your character or the characters in your story should need or want something. It doesn't have to be the same thing the whole time. What your character starts the story wanting may not be what they want at the end. It may not be the overall question of the book, but I like to picture tension hey, I'm a physics teacher. I picture it in a literal sense. If there is tension in a string, it will tug something along. If that string is slack, your object on the string is not going to get pulled forward. If you picture like a horizontal surface with a block with a string, right? If you want that rock to get pulled forward, you need to put tension in that rope. You need to keep your readers having something that is pulling their attention forward in each scene. It doesn't have to be huge. It doesn't have to be life or death stakes, just something that hasn't gone answered. So maybe it's something that will make your readers curious, or make your readers concerned, or make your readers excited, something where they have questions they want answered because your character wants something they don't have, or needs something they don't have, or maybe there's something your characters don't know that they're going to need to know. Some sort of thread throughout that from one scene to a next, there is tension. Another thing to think about are look at all of your characters. I wrote my first draft of the middle grade novel that I'm currently querying, and found that the main character's little sister didn't really do anything and was just kind of a person who was sometimes there. And so I really needed to think about, do I just cut her as a character altogether, or do I integrate her into the plot and make her have more of a relationship with my main character that actually matters? It doesn't have to be a huge part of the plot, but do something, right? We don't want a character who seems very flat, seems very two-dimensional, and isn't really doing anything. As far as structure with your plot, a lot of writing advice will say to open with action. This doesn't necessarily mean, oh, there's a big explosion and chaos, and we have to figure out what, how is this person going to survive, right? It doesn't have to be huge stakes, because again, when your readers are first reading this, they don't know the characters, so they do need to care about what's happening to them. They do need to get to know them a little bit. But imagine standing on the cusp of something being about to happen. It doesn't even have to be the inciting incident where like the whole plot is going to kick off. What we want to avoid is a whole couple chapters that are just nothing happening, and you're just kind of explaining about the world of the character, just so like, here's their friends, here's their hobbies, here's their life, right? Weave those details into some sort of action, so that, again, that contributes to that tension, right? So that as soon as the reader starts, they want to keep going and learn more. Also, you don't need to tell us everything about your characters right away. You can slowly parcel that out. And at a writing workshop I went to, somebody compared it to, and I realize you guys are in 9th and 10th grade, so maybe you may not have experienced this as much, but if you go on a date with someone and they're really boring and they just want to talk all about themselves and they just want to tell you all about their entire life right then while you're having coffee, you're bored. You're like, I don't want to hang out with this person, right? So give that information about your character and their background as it becomes important, woven into things that are actually happening in real time. So it's not just information dump. Like, here's all the stuff about my character, just read that and memorize it. Now things will happen. That doesn't work because people aren't going to be propelled into reading those things, right? All that information dump. Work that into action. And then sort of a handy tip, those numbers are, I want to stress, a rough guide for what I'm about to say. This is not a rule. This is a rough guideline that about 25% of the way into your story should be a point at which things are sort of happening inevitably. Whatever the main plot arc is has kicked in for real. For example, I was reading a book called A Murder in Time, about this Kendra Davidson. I don't know. It's a FBI agent goes back in time and solves a murder in the 1800s, and so it's the first bit of the book has action where what's happening with her in the FBI in the present, and then how does she end up accidentally going back in time, and what's going on. And it's at about that 25% mark where she's back in the past, somebody's been murdered, and she's determined to solve it. And that's, the main plot arc is who committed this murder. And it's somewhere around that quarter mark where that kicks in. You don't want it to be, it doesn't need to be immediate, and you don't want it to be much, much further than that. And then somewhere around, let's say 60%, where we're kind of getting towards the end, you want to up the tension a little bit more. Make it even harder for your partner. In the case of this book about Kendra, whoever, a Murder in Time, in that case, one of the women that she was working with is killed by the killer, right? Which, spoilers, sorry, if you're planning on reading that. And so, things have gotten even more important, right? And more crucial. So upping the stakes at that point, making things more powerful, more so that the reader is going, how is she going to get what she wants? How is this going to end? You're more worried, you're more invested. And then around 85% of the way through should be where you're reaching the climax, where all these threads are coming together and the final act is happening, right? In the case of A Murder in Time, she's found the killer, he's attacked her, she has to fight him off and get free and prove that he was the murderer. Right, so that's where everything is coming to a head, and then you can kind of resolve that toward the end. And again, rough guidelines, just something to think about that I think is helpful. All right, so I've talked enough. Let's go back using these two previous slides. Probably, given that we only wrote for 5 minutes, probably we're looking more on the small scale. But let's edit your previous exercise. And I just want you to take 5 minutes, read it over. If you're in a place where you can read it quietly to yourself out loud, that would be great. Think about all those different things. Are there things you'd like to change? Just take 5 minutes and kind of look it over. And now that we've had a little bit of space away from it, we're doing this on a micro scale, and see what you can do. So let's take 5 minutes, and then we can talk about it. So I've started my timer. I'll be right back. Gotta shut my windows. The new air conditioner is installed. Very exciting. So. All right, it's been 1 minute. And you may find, given that this was a pretty short piece, that you might not want to use the full 5 minutes just for editing. That's fine. Then I would say, once you finish editing and you're really deep into it, maybe you want to add a few more sentences, maybe you want to elaborate on some things, or maybe you want to change some things up about the structure altogether and pick it apart and sort of rebuild it, which would also be fine. All right, and we're at 2 minutes. right, and we're at about 3 minutes. And we're at 4 minutes, so you got 1 more minute. All right, and we're at 5 minutes. And you might notice I just put some stuff in the chat. While I was thinking of it, I wanted to share some of my favorite books on writing. So there's tons of good ones. It's not like these are the only good ones. These are just my personal favorites of the ones I've read. None of them are super brand new because I'm not super brand new. I don't know. I've read them over and over. They're really great. And so I just wanted to share the titles of some of those in case you guys are interested. Would anybody like to share what they wrote? Big share question mark. Awesome, Riley, you will. Cool. So Riley, I will have you, well, do you want to put that in the chat? Awesome. Assuming it'll take you a minute to get it typed in there rather than just copying and pasting, I'm gonna probably go to the next slide and start sharing some information, but it'll still be up there and you can listen to it while you're typing. Does that work out, Riley? Yes, awesome, cool. So I'm gonna go to the next slide. What I've got on this next slide, it's gonna look like a whole bunch of data right away. And what this is just how publishers break down different categories in fiction. So what I've got are category, word count for that category, and then an example from there. These are pretty wide word count ranges. It's just to give you a sense of typically how long pieces are. So that I want to pause. I'm going to go back a slide just so we can't even see it. Nope, that's forward a slide. I want to go back a slide before we even see that it is totally valid to write whatever you want to write, however you want to write it, period. It does not have to fit into a certain formula, a certain format, anything like that. I'm just sharing this information with you so that you can see how traditional publishers handle book publishing and categorizing them to use as you will. It is not saying you have to do it this way. Just if you were going to seek out in the future traditional publishing, this is how you would do it. And I'll mention, I know you guys are in 9th and 10th grade. There was a writing workshop last week that I was listening to. It's all on your YouTube right now. It's specifically about writing middle grade works. And one of the panel discussions with authors I was listening to, one of the authors was 18 and her book had already been published, right? So you write a book this year, you could be on that panel at 18 too. So just to mention, this is not just something to think about when you're an adult. So anyhow, here's some examples. Picture books. Oh, and by the way, with credit to a website, called Word Count Dracula. If you just search Word Count Dracula, she has all sorts of great posts and lots of information. So that is where I got most of this stuff. If you're writing a picture book, first of all, neat note about writing picture books, you can submit them with pictures, like if you're working with an artist, but you don't have to. Most publishers have artists that they work with that they could pair you with. So there's no need to think, oh, but I need to find someone to illustrate it. If you happen to already be working with someone who does illustrations, cool, but you don't have to. And really for word count ranges, for all of these, it's usually somewhere in the middle, right? So for picture books, we're thinking maybe around 300 to 600 words is sort of the sweet spot. Early reader and chapter books, those really can vary a lot. Especially chapter books, those will often be sorted sort of by grade level. And so you'll have the ones that are younger kid chapter books that are around 4,000, going all the way up to maybe around 13,000 for older kid chapter books. And again, there are exceptions to all these rules. Middle grade is one of the two categories I've focused on the most. So for middle grade, 25,000 to 60,000, but again, for realistic middle grade, the sweet spot is usually higher than 25,000. I'm thinking sweet spot usually in the 40 to 50 range, or 35 to 55 range. I know my middle grade novel that I'm submitting is 51,000 words, and I feel like that's a really solid word count. When my first draft of it was 36,000 words, I felt like that was a little short. And so I saw that Riley posted something. I'm going to read it when I'm done with this slide. Thank you for sharing, Riley. Notice that for both middle grade and young adult, fantasy tends to have higher word counts. I assume, I don't write fantasy, but I assume that's because there's a lot of additional world building that has to happen, right? We can assume we know how tea kettles work in the real world and cars and how cities are laid out, right? Whereas that wouldn't necessarily be true if it's a science fiction or a fantasy novel. So I think that's why those word counts tend to be a little longer. With middle grade, one of the things that they tell you with publishing with middle grade and young adult is they pay a lot of attention to the ages of the main characters. That middle grade characters should be between the ages of like 11 to 13. A little bit older than the ideal reader, but not by much, and not teenagers. I mean, 13, sure, but not like in the middle of being a teenager, not in high school. Young adult novels, basically high school age. Once you're getting into college, that's a little too old. I did not make these rules. I'm not sure why they have these rules, but they tend to say for new authors looking to get picked up, those are sort of the guidelines to go by. So if you're, one of the books that I wrote when I was younger was intended to be young adult, but the main character was 23, that's not what they're looking for, right? A 23-year-old finished college already is not gonna be as relatable. You'll notice that by the fantasy young adult and by adult, I have that asterisk there by 150,000. They really say that when you are submitting your book to agents, and we'll talk about that, if you are a new writer, and not new in the sense of actually new to writing, but new to publishing, keep your word count under 100,000. That once you hit 100,000, remember, agents have to read this over and over. Your publisher, your editor, people have to read it over and over. People who are very busy, and if they're like, ooh, let's get an extra digit, that feels like a lot. Can you get it down to 98,000 instead of 102 or something? That makes a difference. So although books in those categories can go up around 150,000 words, it's usually not debuts. Harry Potter, worth mentioning in that the first couple of Harry Potter books are sort of middle grade, and then as he ages, sort of the issues in the books and the intensity of them also increases. And so I would say maybe the first 3 are more middle grade, and then the remaining books are more young adult. Also, you'll notice the first ones are shorter both because they're middle grade and because J.K. Rowling was yet to be incredibly famous and successful. Once you're famous and successful, you can make your book as long as you want, right? Like Order of the Phoenix, right? So yeah, just some things I wanted to point out there. All right, and before we go on to the next slide, I would like to read what Riley wrote. A police officer in a sharp blue suit entered the imposing tall glass building. Her shades glinted severely in the sunlight streaming through the windows. The officer took her bronze police badge from one of her pockets and held it out to the manager, who had hobbled out of his office upon hearing the commotion caused by the officer's arrival. I have reason to believe that a thief has taken refuge in your store, the officer informed the manager. He nodded and let her pass. The officer spotted a trail of meat bits, clearly from the stolen meat. She followed it cautiously through the aisles, blinking in surprise when she found a brown dog with dark curly fur sitting hunched over its catch. The dog looked warily up at the officer. Oh, I'm a vegetarian, but also a dog lover, so I had this really interesting series of emotions where I was like, oh, no meat. Oh, a dog. So yeah, that's great. And there's really sharp writing in there and really vivid, right? You can really see that scene, right? You can picture the light, like there's a lot of sensory details. Like, that's great. Thank you, Riley. All right, so let's talk more about that road to publication. I've been talking about traditional publication. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in detail, but then I also want to point out that there's self-publishing is also an option. So in traditional publication, the way this works, so like you go into Barnes & Noble and you see books for sale, right? Or you go on Amazon and, well, no, Amazon has everything. Let's not say that. Physical books that you can get copies of, most big sellers, right? You can't just submit as a writer. You can't just go to a publishing house and say, hey, you should publish my book. What you need is a literary agent. You submit your work to them. If they want to take you on, then they will submit it to the publisher. And the idea then is that the publisher is not inundated with tons and tons of manuscripts, right? They have agents who can say, hey, I know this publisher is looking for a middle grade mystery novel, and I think this one is really charming, and I'm going to give it to you, right? So the agents are sort of like that barrier between the writers and the publishers, who can then say, yes, I think this is good. So there's already sort of a level of being vetted there. So if you're trying to get published and your story is edited, it's complete, it's ready to go, then you look for literary agents. And what you can do is you can search literary agents who are looking for, literary agents seeking picture books, literary agents seeking fantasy middle grade, right? And then oftentimes they'll take more than one category, right? But not usually everything. And usually, oftentimes there will be ones who do fiction and ones who do nonfiction, and it's separate. And even within nonfiction, there's memoir, and then there's cookbooks, right? There's all sorts of things within nonfiction we're not getting into today. So you can look for what literary agents are looking for and submit to them. And they all have different details on how you submit. You usually write a short letter about your novel called a query letter, and then you attach some number of pages, and you do it over email, right? So your first 10 pages or your first 50 pages or your first 2 chapters, they all want different things. If it's a picture book, most of the time they want the entire text of the picture book, just right in the email, and they don't necessarily want to see pictures right away. Then once you have a literary agent, which is where I am right now, where I've got a couple of literary agents so you submit to them, and then they get back to you and they either say no, or they get back to you and they say, yeah, I'm liking it, send me your full manuscript. And so that's where I'm sitting right now, is I have 4 different agents with my full manuscript. And I'm just like, so yes, I'm waiting. I was really hoping that magically I would hear back from one of them in the week, so then I could announce it to you guys, but I haven't heard back. I'm told that everything slows down in publishing in August as well. Anyhow, so yeah, they read your little sample, they read your query letter, and they say yes or no. And then if they say yes, then they say, well, now I want to see the whole thing. And then you send them the whole thing, and then they decide. And then they submit it to publishers. So your agent would maybe ask you to do edits first before they start submitting it to publishers. And then once a publisher says yes to it, they often have editors working there who will have you do further edits. The whole process is incredibly slow. So if you are sort of like instant gratification, I write a book, I want to have it for sale next month, Not with traditional publishing. It is slow. It is glacial. It is several years, right? I will say that agents and publishers are saying that it doesn't. They have plenty of reasons to be optimistic, even in the midst of the pandemic. Books are still being sold. Deals are still being made, especially given that deals made now are for books that are actually going to be sold probably late 2021, early 2022, right? So things don't really seem to be slowing down there, which is good. Publishers will often, or agents will often talk about submitting to the big five. There's sort of 5 big publishing houses. There used to be more, and then they've consolidated. And those are ones like if you go and you pull a random book off your bookshelf, odds are it's been published by one of these 5 big publishers. Macmillan is one of them, Houghton Mifflin. I don't really know off the top of my head because, again, I don't have to know that. I will get an agent and they will know that. There's also small presses. And so one thing I will note is there can be a little, can I do a pointer, right? You could just go, if it's a very small press, you can go straight to a small press without an agent. Why do I keep clicking on that? So some small companies will publish books directly and you can submit directly to them. So that's another option, but it's what I'm told is it's always a good idea to have an agent because they're really practiced at like reading contracts and helping you with all the boring legal stuff. Another completely good, valid option is self-publication. And there's a lot of different ways to do this. You can do just ebooks, and Amazon has a way to do that. There's a lot of different services that allow you to create an ebook. And so there's never a physical copy. So you want instant gratification. That's the way to do it. But of course, there's a lot of downsides. You have to do all the publicity yourself. You have to figure out, are you going to hire someone to do cover art? Are you going to do it yourself? Oftentimes, people who are very serious about self-publishing hire editors to read over the work, or their whole job is to edit manuscripts, and that can really, really help make your writing more professional. So it's more DIY. It's a lot more that you kind of have to handle yourself. So you could do completely ebooks. You could do print on demand sort of publishing where they aren't producing physical copies unless someone orders them and then they'll print it, which I think could be a little bit more expensive per copy. Or you can do the sort of printing where you will buy a big batch and then you will be selling them yourself, mailing them out or whatever. So there's a lot of different options there. And then I also wanted to mention, last thing, is that while you are doing all this, while you are writing things, having a community of writers around you is really, really great. And so forming writers groups, whether it's in person or online, through Girl Scouts, in some manner, to have people to talk to about the process is really great, so that you're not sort of alone in it. You have other people who are trying to finish manuscripts, who are saying, hey, can I have you read this paragraph? Or saying, hey, have you heard of this literary agent? There's also writing conferences, which honestly, now is a great time to go to writing conferences because you don't have to go anywhere. They're all virtual. And there's some really great writing conferences doing really cool virtual stuff. There's really great talks often available that you can sort of find the archives of and just watch these talks. And then contests and pitches, you can always submit novels or short stories in different contests that exist, first-time writer, or a specific contest about vampires, or, all sorts of things. You can enter contests, which can be A, fun, and B, then if you're writing that query letter for an agent, you can say, oh, my novel won the such and such vampire award or whatever. And then there's sometimes even pitch contests on Twitter where there's a few times a year where you use certain hashtags and you write a few sentences about your book, and then agents go through, and if an agent likes your post, then it's kind of like they're saying, hey, will you query me? I kind of like this. And so it's a way to get attention for your book and a way to meet other writers as well. So there's all sorts of ways to engage in the writing community that I think are so, so valuable. But again, keeping in mind, anyone can be a part of that, which is great, but also going back to the idea that sometimes people can read your work and then give you feedback that makes you feel like garbage. Don't be near those people. Be done with them, So seek out the other positive people who can create a good writing environment. I'm still on pointer. I have a couple different suggestions for taking this talk further today. One is called comps. One of the things that often agents look for is books that comp to yours, which means compare or complement. Look for books that are sort of similar to the ones you want to write. They're in the same category. By the way, you'll notice I use the word category and not genre. Genre is things like mystery. I guess I did pull out fantasy because the word length is so different, but like mystery versus contemporary versus historical, those are genres. So do you with your book or the book that you want to write, what are their word counts? Obviously, you're not going to sit down and count all the words, but you can kind of get an estimate. How many words roughly are on one page? How many pages there are? It's multiplication, right? You can get a sense of the word count. Oftentimes, if you look in the back of a book that you're reading, in the thank yous, the author will thank their agent. And so you find a book similar to yours, and then you look up and you go, well, who's this author's agent? And then you kind of make a mental note of that. And it's also then something you can write in your letter. So for example, in my query letter, I know we're running very short on time here. Well, I don't need it, but it's right here. I'll read it. So yeah, one of my first sentences in my query letter is, I'm hopeful that Witchcraft, Murder, and Apple Cake, my contemporary middle grade mystery, could be a good fit for you. It combines the sisterly dynamics of the Penderwicks books with the puzzles, adventures, and LGBTQ inclusivity of the Wells and Wong mysteries. And so this tells the agent sort of where it would sit, right? And what is it comparable to, and gives them something they can picture in their head based on something they already know. Then my other activity suggestion, I'm calling pluses and minuses, where you can, this is sort of to get a measure of the tension in your book and look scene by scene and go, how are things going for your character? Probably no one wants to read a book where things just get uniformly worse, but also it's not much of a plot and there's not much tension if things just get uniformly better. And so we want to see some pluses and some minuses. Are things improving for your character in this scene? Are they not? Does your character think they are, but they really aren't, right? And getting a mix there, and paying attention to what does your character want in each scene? Are they going to get it or not? And that tension. All right. So those are my two suggestions for taking it further. Once again, here's my contact info. I'd love to be in touch with any of you. If you want to share your work with me or ask me more questions or just talk about dogs or whatever you'd like, you can email me or find me on Twitter. Any questions? I know, Katrine, we are at 1:01 according to my clock, but if there's like one or two questions, or I can talk to you all later. Also, I'm such a dog person, just looking at the group chat. I'm like, oh, I hope the officer is nice to the dog, even though this is a scenario you just made up. I'm like invested in this dog now, so. All right, if you don't have any questions right now, again, feel free to reach out to me. I'm very friendly. I'd love to hear from you. Take care. Thank you so much for having me. This has been really fun. I really enjoyed this.
Thank you, Liz, for being here. I'm just going to do a quick screen share just so people.
Yeah.
Let's do this really quick. So just so everyone remembers, thank you for those next steps. Those are really fun. I did not think about like how you do need to position your book in order to like talk to a literary agent, because you have to give them a frame of reference for them to kind of get where you're coming from and what to somewhat expect, but what makes yours different.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So friends on the call, so after you complete one of the activities that Liz has shared with us, congratulations, you have completed step 3 of the Senior Novelist Badge. And I believe there are 3 other steps to complete, and I think the last was actually writing 20 pages of a story. So as you continue on, we'd love to, hear from you and, hear the progress, I guess, as you said. You can either email us at info@gsbadgerland.org, email Liz for assistance.
Absolutely.
Post something awesome and hashtag us at Badgerland at Home. We always love to see where the Girl Scouts take it further. So thank you for joining us today. Thank you to Liz. And happy writing, everybody. Have a great weekend.